Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I got earbuds and I don't know if they work.
Are they knockoffs or are they the AirPods?
Oh, they're knockoffs.
The only way to go.
Oh yeah, come on.
Good. Oh,
Hey, Kelly.
challenges here. Nope. Hi, everybody.
Hey, Kelly.
Figure out a better setup here. My laundry room here, and there we go. So just so you guys know, we are live on YouTube right now. That's how we're doing the things these days. Good evening. Let's see, we're waiting on Paul. Okay, how is everybody?
Doing well.
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. These meetings are interesting because I have to like put one of my kids to bed and then go into a room away from everyone else. I have a very small house. And then
Check the laundry.
other kid to bed. What?
Check the laundry.
Yeah, well, I got to figure out a better setup right here, but soon I might be able to move into the main part of the house in a few minutes. Let me think. Did anybody have trouble with the link or with the agenda or anything, like getting the agenda packet?
No.
Okay. In the future, if you all like, if there's a better way for me to send things to you, or if you would like me to actually send you a calendar invite for the meetings, I'm happy to do that. So just let me know if whatever is happening is not ideal. We don't have a chair right now because that's our first agenda item. So I don't know who's supposed to call the meeting to order, but someone can do the honors, and it's up to you all if you want to wait a couple more minutes. I didn't get anybody asking for the link for the meeting. So I think it's just us tonight, no public audience here. Well, maybe on YouTube, but not joining us in Zoom.
Did Paul give an indication if he was able to attend?
I didn't hear from him, so I'm assuming he can attend.
Now we have the rule that those who do not attend are immediately up for consideration for chair, right?
Well, I think we could probably get started and he can join if it's not like we're going to jump into anything real important, or, I mean, not that it's not important, but you know what I mean? I guess we can, call the meeting to order then at 7:03 p.m.
Okay. The first thing we do is typically see if there are any public comments, and seeing as there are no members of the public in attendance, and I didn't receive any comments to share with you. So there's nothing there. let me see. I'll go ahead and facilitate the next agenda item. Election of chair. So I pasted in a couple of sentences from our code, chapter 2.28, which kind of governs the Historic Review Board and tells us, who serves on it and how long their terms are, and what their job is as the HRB. So that code chapter says the officers shall consist of a chairperson and any other officer deemed necessary by the board. As far as I know, in recent years, we haven't had anything other than a chair. Officers shall be elected by the board members, and no individual shall hold the same office for more than 2 consecutive years. So our former chair was John McLaughlin, and when he left in June, then Ken Basinger kind of served as the interim chair until now. So none of you have served as chair so far. Oh, and here we go. There's Paul. Hi, Paul. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, we just got started, and I just explained that the HRB, the code says HRB should elect a chairperson that will serve for no longer than 2 years. So that's where we're at.
Okay. I'm sorry for the delay.
No problem.
Well, who's chairing this?
Well, no one really, because we are about to elect a chair.
Okay.
So I've just been kind of facilitating the agenda so far. And I think usually we would hear, you all can just throw out a nomination if you would like to.
Well, for me, I would look at Grant because he's the one with the most experience right now, and he's definitely capable.
I would second that nomination.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Me.
All right.
I agree.
I guess we can go ahead and take a vote on the nomination of Grant Blythe as the HRB chair. I'll just go in order on my screen from the bottom left of Sabrina Ferry.
What am I supposed to say? Am I supposed
Oh, you
yes?
can say yes or no.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, just a vote. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Carrie Crook
I vote yes.
and Grant Blythe.
I'll abstain, I guess.
Ray Stobie
Yes.
and Paul Edgar.
Yes.
Wonderful. We have our chair, Grant Blythe. And you can take it from here, Grant.
All right, well, very good. Thank you for the vote of confidence. On that note, I guess we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, opportunity for HRB input on the city commission goals and or budget. Kelly, did you have a comments on that or a presentation?
Sure, yeah. So the city commission each year or every 2 years when they are putting together the biennium budget and their goals for that budget cycle, they typically hold a retreat. I think that's coming up later this week. And at that retreat, they kind of go through a goal setting exercise and that results in the example that you saw in your agenda packet was for the previous year's biennium goals. So I imagine the outcome of their retreat will probably, look something like that. And they've actually solicited more public input than they have in other years. And so there's been a survey up on the website where people can kind of submit ideas for the goals that they could set, or things that they could try to prioritize. And then they're asking all of the boards and commissions if they would like to give any recommendations to them before they start their retreat. So the Planning Commission last night, I believe, they had a discussion earlier in January, and then they decided to write a letter outlining their recommendations to the commission. And they don't, I don't think we have time to like write a letter and come back and approve the letter, because the retreat is happening in a couple of days. So I think the form of your recommendations, if you wanted to make any, would probably just be, you agree upon what it is, and then I could send it in an email. One of you, or Grant as the chair, could kind of send it to the city commission. So anyway, I will kind of let you guys discuss whether you would like to make any recommendations and what those would be. Also, the Planning Commission did recommend to implement something coming out of the comprehensive plan process with one of they kind of gave a list of things that they thought might be good. And one of the things on their list was to update the historic design guidelines sometime in the 2021 to 2023 biennium. So wanted to share that with you, but go ahead and discuss, and I can help facilitate getting the information back to City Commission.
I'd like to make a statement, if I could.
Start with Paul.
Thank you. I talked with Laura probably a few months ago about the design guidelines, and when there was a hearing, a LUBA hearing, they made our design guidelines more effective as what the court or what the judges said in relationship to them being equal to some of the code, our code. And the idea of getting our design guidelines into a better shape that have a little bit more yeses and nos and rights and wrongs can help us and help anybody that comes before us with a more definitive understanding, more descriptively. And Laura seemed to think that needed to be budgeted. And that's the key thing. It said, if we start to enter into updating any of this or going through a process, we should ask for and get budgeted some additional funds, because it is an additional effort. Thank you.
Anybody else have additional comments?
So are we talking about the design guidelines for new construction, which we should have read through for this meeting, or is that?
It could be on the design guidelines, I think, or any other ideas for input that we should provide to the City Commission.
I see. Okay.
Well, I mean, if we're talking design guidelines, we're kind of jumping to line or item 3 versus 2. So are we?
I guess, I mean, in the sense of updating, I guess, yeah, we haven't gone through them, but
Right.
yeah, whether we should request budget to update them or otherwise.
Yeah, I brought it up because the Planning Commission suggested to the City Commission that we might want to budget some time and funding to update our historic design guidelines sometime in the next few years. So, the City Commission is going to consider that among many of their priorities
All right.
this week.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I agree with Paul, and that I think it would be a worthy thing to tackle in the next couple of years and look at. Particularly, I don't think that they address some of the changes in the zoning, like the getting rid of single family home zoning and in the metro, and some of the things that have come up around that, like the cottage housing and stuff in Kenema. I don't feel like we were very well equipped or armed to deal with in the past because we didn't have guidelines on it, and so it made it a tricky issue when those types of applications did come before the board. So I think there's certainly some room to update them to kind of match the current environment.
There's there's also a need to look at specific areas such as windows, and there are subjective interpretations, and somewhere along the line, when a window has is one sheet of glass with a mullion across the top of it, without any configuration like a sill ledge or at the bottom of the window, and where windows now don't look like a historic window. If you look at Grant's house and the windows that he has on his house, they come down at the bottom, and yes, these are more modern, but they have these features on them that are completely being forgotten. And somewhere along the line, it might be a time to try to look at what is a historic window, and every design has a different type of window. So if we're looking at some designs,
Paul, hold on. I think we
1910 or
lost
something like that, they have different windows than let's say earlier.
I think we lost Kelly.
We did. Although the meeting's still
And now Sabrina's the host.
yeah. I guess Sabrina, you might want to watch in case it asks you to let Kelly in. But she should be able
Sure. Will something pop up?
if it did, she might be able to do it on her own, but if you're the host, it might ask you.
Okay. I'll let her in if I see something. I'm kind of new to Zoom, so this is it's not
Sure.
super familiar.
Okay then.
So she's back.
Oh, yeah.
There she is.
Sorry about that. My computer decided to shut itself down. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if Paul. Do you want Paul to repeat what he was saying? Kelly?
I was just trying to talk about going through things like windows and what a historic window really looks like and what is accepted. And so we get into some of these things, questions is whether something is compliant or not with our code. It would be best if we were to discuss some of this stuff beforehand to make sure that we all have an understanding of what is acceptable and not acceptable, to stay away from just subjective thinking.
Yeah. I think, well, that to me sounds like maybe a work plan item for the HRB. And if you all would like, maybe next agenda, we could have that discussion about what the HRB's work plan is for the year.
Excellent.
Unless you meant something about the city commission, Paul, I don't know.
No, excellent. I think we should just try to look through things. And I think that common sense will guide us once we start getting into things and say, okay, this needs more discussion or this needs a change. And I think we just need to go through different areas and on a work sessions. And I think through that process, a lot of stuff will come out.
Yeah, I think, Kelly, the question maybe would be if we were to want to look at doing a revision on the design guidelines or an update or refresh, would we need to request, some additional budget or staff support or scope that from the commission as part of this planning process?
Yeah, I think so. The planning commission's estimation was that update of the design guidelines would be a 2-year project. So I think that it would probably take definitely some budget and some time to, that the city commission would have to figure into the biennium plan.
Well, why don't we start trying to Kelly, can you put together some estimates or work with it, staff additional to see what everybody thinks we might need to accomplish that?
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think that we would do that if the city commission ended up putting it in their biennium goals or budget. We would get an estimate and kind of get it baked into the budget. So for your purposes, I think the question is, are we sending a recommendation to the commission of, let's prioritize updating the design guidelines and figure out, how that works in the next few months as we go through the budget process.
Yeah, I think asking the city to, while we're updating design guidelines, to also look at clarifying current guidelines at the same time. And if that includes more money, then asking for that in the budget, I think is what we're all in line with, right?
Yes.
Yeah, seems that way. That would be
Yep.
supportive of them adding that as a goal. Mhm.
So you're saying we should send that like an email to the city commission?
Well, yeah, and I think what the planning commission did was kind of send a letter, and they had more time because they have 2 meetings a month. So I think, if Grant is the chair, if you're willing to, it might make sense for an email just to come from the chair.
So can I motion that we do that if everybody feels?
I would second it.
Kelly, do you want to pull the board?
Sure. Everyone switched order, so I'm gonna just go with it. Paul Edgar,
Yes.
Grant Blythe,
Aye.
Carrie Crook,
Yes.
Sabrina Ferry,
Yes.
and Ray Stobie.
Hi.
All right.
Okay, I will draft a letter supporting that goal then. Okay, then we can move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is HRB 101, Design Guidelines, Anatomy of a Staff Report, and HRB Application Types.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll share my screen. I have a little presentation. And I think this should probably, depending on how much you all want to talk about, this might be 20 or 30 minutes. Okay. Okay. HRB 101. I thought that these 3 topics made sense to start with, and especially since we have 3 new members. If there are additional topics that make sense to do, at future meetings, by all means, please let me know. I'm also, you can contact me anytime to ask questions as well, since I know a lot of this is going to be new to you all. And, it took me a while to get my head around all of it. And I get paid to do that. So I totally understand if, we need to kind of walk through things more, especially at the beginning. So I want to just talk about the types of reviews that HRB will be doing, the things that you'll see come on your agenda moving forward. Just kind of walk through a staff report and what it looks like and what parts of it are kind of the most important parts to read, knowing that you have lots of reading that you have to do every month. And then just a really brief overview of the design guidelines. So the types of reviews that you'll see are some of our quasi-judicial hearings that Carrie Richter kind of talked to you about a few weeks ago. So this includes alterations to historic sites. So this is one recent example. The Carnegie Library is a historic, locally designated structure. The city wanted to put a large addition onto it, and so that came to the board, and the board reviewed that addition against our design guidelines for alterations. These are always a type 3 review that comes to the board unless it's a small project that meets the HRB policies. And in those cases, I can approve as staff. So those are things like, you know, somebody changing out their front door, or, you know, putting new roofing on that meets the HRB policies. Or, you know, installing a fence on a historic property. If it meets HRB policies, you won't see it. If it doesn't meet HRB policies, then you will be asked to review it. Another review type of application is for new construction. So any new structures that are over 200 square feet in the McLaughlin district and the Kenema district will come to the board. So this is a commercial building on 7th Street. And this, I think, was maybe 2014, 2015. So sometimes a project will have additional reviews outside of historic review. So for example, this one had to go through site plan design review as well, and that was a staff level review, and historic review. And most of the time there's not a conflict between those, but sometimes there is. So for example, in this one, the side of the building doesn't have any windows and it's built right on the lot line. Site plan design review requires windows on the side. So the historic review board approved no windows because, you know, if in the traditional kind of Main Street development, you know, you might see the buildings right next to each other. And so it doesn't make sense to have windows on the side, right? So that was approved by the HRB, therefore kind of you overrule the staff require the standards that would apply normally. Public improvements as well. So any city projects in the right of way or on public property that are proposed also have to come before the board. So this is the most recent example, Lauderet Park. Not a whole lot of work that was being done there, but you know, new walls and new surfaces and materials, the signage, that's all kind of under your purview. Demolition reviews. So every once in a while, we will get a request for demolition, and our code does allow demolition denial. We have specific criteria in the code for demolition, and we don't see a whole lot of it. This is a non-contributing structure in Kenema. I haven't personally seen any applications for demolition of contributing structures or designated structures in McLaughlin, but you never know what's going to be requested. We have preservation grants. So the city has a small amount of funding every year to give out for preservation projects for any designated structure in the city. So it's a matching grant, 50-50 up to $1,000. In some cases, it can be a little bit more than that. This was a window repair on the C.G. Huntley House in McLaughlin on Washington Street. So you can see the trim hadn't yet been repaired or redone in this picture, but the windows are nice and reglazed and repainted. So the grant funding kind of just tries to incentivize people to maintain and fix up their properties, especially the historic features of their properties. So as you'll see those come through every once in a while. And it's a fairly straightforward grant program. We try to make it pretty simple for folks so we can give out the money. Design advice. So the board typically will offer advice before someone turns in an application if they want some informal feedback from the board. Then they will submit their preliminary plans and drawings. When we review design advice, it's pretty casual, and the board, instead of giving advice as a board, really it's coming from you as individuals on the board. And it might be conflicting advice, and that's okay. But really it's just asking for your kind of personal advice and on how you think the design does or doesn't meet the guidelines, and any suggestions you have for the applicant to help them craft an application and a design that can be approved in the future. And the design advice becomes part of the public record. If they end up turning in an application for review, the design advice is kind of part of the public record, but nothing's binding. So something that you say in design advice, you're not going to be held to it necessarily. We also have a process for designation and de-designation. This is a house that was de-designated in 2012. It's over by the PGE substation on 17th and Main. And PGE actually, after it was de-designated, then they demolished it. The board totally understood that that was the path. So sometimes that's why someone might request de-designation. Essentially, if a house has kind of lost all of its integrity, then it might be a candidate for de-designation. Designation is also, of a district or of a structure. It is something that you might see as well. And we don't typically get a lot of designation requests because the incentives for that are pretty light. Really, it's the availability of the grant funding, which is minimal. And so even if folks are very preservation minded and they want to completely preserve and restore their home, they still might not want to designate it and have that additional regulation on it. So that's what I hear from people when they ask. But we might see these come across your desk. Any questions before I move on to the next topic? Any questions about the types of reviews? All right. You're going to make me be the boring one-woman show here. There might be a couple other random things that come before you. I try to think of everything, but I think one thing is that National Register nominations, if there are any in the city, will also come to you. So that you basically are the local local advisory group to SHPO, essentially, to the State Historic Preservation Office. If there is a nomination of any building in Oregon City, building or structure or district, to be on the National Register. So that's another thing you might see.
I have heard that there are some areas around Oregon City that would like to gain a historic district status. It's really in their neighborhood, or it's their bailiwick, but it would be coming through us or through you.
Yeah.
What is that process?
So if a neighborhood wanted to designate themselves or create a new historic district, then they can do that and propose it to the city and go through the historic review board. I don't know exactly what the requirements are off the top of my head because we haven't actually done that during my tenure, but it's different. The process for a conservation district is different from a National Register district, but either way the board would be involved in the process and making a recommendation to the city commission. Okay, I'm going to move on to anatomy of a staff report. So just a quick outline of the staff reports, and I'm going to show you an example and just scroll through it really quickly. So there's a cover page that has just all of the basic information, location, applicant, staff recommendation. And then we put right up front the recommended conditions of approval. So you'll have a staff report whenever there's a quasi-judicial hearing for new construction or for alteration, for demolition. You will get a staff report from me a week ahead of time. It'll be on the agenda, and it will include all of the findings of how this proposal or request meets or doesn't meet our code and our design guidelines, and then what my recommendation is to you. You are absolutely free to agree or disagree with me. But if you disagree with me or with the findings that are in the staff report, then you'll need to kind of come up with your own findings or, add to the findings to support whatever decision you're going to make. Usually there are at least a few conditions of approval, meaning the proposal, let's say it's for a single family home in Kenema, and the general design, is great, meets the guidelines, but there are just a few little things that either we don't have enough information about from the applicant, or there's a little thing that doesn't quite meet the guidelines. So we'll write a condition of approval that says you're approved, but you have to change this, this, and this. So that's what those conditions of approval are. And those, I work with the applicant after the fact to then, make sure that their final building permits and plans reflect what you've required through the conditions of approval. And so those are really important to make sure they're worded in a way that is clear to everyone. So when we put them up at the very beginning so that nobody gets tired of reading and doesn't get to the conditions of approval at the end. After that, I typically include an executive summary and then a lot of background information, existing conditions, the context, what is around the site, what are the neighboring historic structures, and then project description. Then the next important section is the approval criteria and findings. So any code or guideline that applies to the particular proposal, I will include in the staff report, and then include my own analysis and findings of how this proposal either meets or doesn't meet that specific standard. And so I will quickly, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to share a different document. If I can find it. There we go. So this is a staff report from, that's pretty small, isn't it? Let's make it big. No. How does that look to you guys? Still pretty
there-
small.
It's better.
So this is staff report from 2019, a new home in Kenema. So you'll see the recommendation right here on the front page, approval with conditions, the conditions of approval list here. And then getting into the background information, I usually include the maps and photos of existing conditions. So the applicant's going to submit an application with a lot of the same information. And then I take information from their application to put into the staff report. And sometimes I, put it in my own words. But if you are, it's good to read through everything, of course, but if you are limited in time, I would advise you to just read the staff report first, because the pertinent information from the application I have taken and pasted into the staff report. So we look at the surrounding structures. Then we start talking about the actual proposal at hand. That is a nice rendering there. You don't always get really nice renderings. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you just get the plans in 2 dimensions. And so you'll get floor plans, you'll get building elevations. And then, of course, the applicant usually writes up a narrative. Sometimes the applications come in and they are very well put together with lots of good responses and explanations of how they meet the design guidelines. And other times they're very light on that. And so essentially that puts more work on me and you to kind of sift through it all and figure it out. We always try to get the applicants to provide more information, but there's only so much you can do sometimes. So there's my executive summary. I think these days I'm pasting it at the very beginning. And then here's the code responses. So what you'll see is the code section. That's not a good example here. So code section, D1, and then it'll either say applicable, not applicable, or complies, or does not comply, or complies with conditions, and my explanation after. So here's kind of an example. So we have a condition of approval in here. So we say complies with condition, and then that condition is in that list at the beginning of the document. So there's a lot of code that is more about applicability and process at the beginning, and then the last part of the findings is the design guidelines, really the meat of the staff report. So I will paste in the design guidelines that are pertinent to the application. And in this example, in italics there is actually what the applicant said, and then kind of my analysis of that below. Any questions? I know I'm kind of going fast. No? Okay. So you'll see all the design guidelines in here, findings, conditions. I try to organize it in a way that is a little bit more readable for you all. So I'll kind of try to categorize what I'm talking about. When we have applications that have a lot of moving parts. So sometimes there's a house and a garage. Sometimes, there's things to talk about, like the driveways and the tree removal and the landscaping. And then, let's see, I'm trying to get to the end. The last part of chapter 1740, which is our historic overlay chapter, it's, everything in here is from that chapter of our code. Historic preservation incentives. This sounds better than it is. It really is just an exception to setbacks that you can approve if you think it's historically appropriate. and many times it is, or, you know, it should be. In this case, there was no request for an exception to setbacks, and so there's no preservation incentive. And then we'll kind of have the conclusion, list of exhibits that are included in your agenda packet. So all of those things, all of those exhibits listed there will be included in your agenda packet after the staff report. So I'm going to stop sharing that and go back to the PowerPoint. Any questions about staff reports? Am I boring you yet? All right. There we go. So as a summary, what I just explained, Chapter 1740, Historic Overlay District, you know, that's where, you know, if you're going to read, skim the staff report, I would make sure to read more thoroughly the conditions of approval in the design guidelines section, rather than like the applicability and the general standards. Most of the time, those are kind of carte blanche, or that's not the right word. Those are kind of just very generic. Okay, moving on to design guidelines. So we have two sets of design guidelines. One is for alterations and additions, and I just pasted the web page here where they live. These guidelines for alterations and additions are we just pulled directly from the Secretary of Interior standards for rehab, for rehabilitation. So the National Park Service publishes lots of great information on historic preservation. They run the National Register program, and they have standards for rehabilitation that we have just adopted as our own guidelines. So an example of that is number 3, each property will be recognized as a physical record of its time, place, and use. Changes that create a false sense of historical development, such as adding conjectural features or elements from other historic properties, will not be undertaken. So, you know, these are pretty subjective, which is where you come in, and you can use your judgment to determine if something meets this this standard or not. And they're all kind of like that. So, you know, I give my analysis and make my recommendation, and then, you know, you'll take that and you know, add your own opinion to it, and then make your judgment. We have, in addition to the Secretary of Interior standards, we have some Oregon City specific standards that that are also part of the design guidelines for alterations. I think I don't want to get into, you know, walking through it line by line with you. I think that if you would like, I think it could be a topic for a future work session, perhaps, kind of as Paul suggested. You know, if there's a specific part of the design guidelines that you kind of want to look at in depth and talk about, and there's definitely a lot to talk about. So, but I'm not going to get into any more detail than this right now. Design guidelines for new construction applies to any new structure over 200 square feet in Kenema or in McLaughlin as well, or actually on a historic landmark property. So if there's a historic landmark outside of one of the districts and somebody wants to build a 400 square foot garage, for example, on it, then they would go through this process. And so the design guidelines for new construction, they have separate design guidelines for McLaughlin and for Kenema, and then for, you know, commercial buildings and residential buildings. The guidelines talk about which styles of architecture are appropriate in each district. So this is a screenshot of Bungalow Guidelines in McLaughlin, and there's some really good visuals and pictures, good examples in the guidelines as well. So we always recommend that applicants really, use this as their Bible as they're kind of going about designing their project. In addition to kind of the general guidelines and the different styles, there are more specific guidelines on things like building form or the site itself. So grading and landscaping and the placement of structures. And the way that this is structured, the guideline gives kind of a principle, good example, and then has a not allowed section. But there are lots of, this is not complete in that, there are probably lots of other designs and manners of building that are not specifically addressed in the design guidelines. So if it says if it's something that's not in the not allowed category, but it's also not clearly listed in the principal good example, then that is where we get into more of a gray area where it's more difficult to determine whether a building is going to be compatible or appropriate. And so we tell applicants that if they follow the design guidelines, then they're on the safe path. And if they want to do something that's a little bit outside of the design guidelines, but not quite in the not allowed category, that their path might be a little bit rougher, or just, they have to provide more evidence that they meet the guidelines in some way. There are also really specific element guidelines, which I find very helpful. So this one, for example, in the middle of the page, you have awnings and canopies on a commercial building. So there's principal design that is preferred, and then there's a not allowed. So it's really easy to just point to that and say, sorry, your plastic awning is not allowed, and so don't propose it to the board, right?
Can I ask a question right now? It's kind of like in this shiny things, all of a sudden we got solar panels are an issue. And how and where somebody could have a solar panel becomes a question. And, in Kanema or McLaughlin District, it's just something new that's part of this changing world.
Yeah, so I think there's some guidelines in here on solar installations. There's this antenna, it's a little bit similar, antennas and satellite dishes here at the top. So solar panels on a historic structure will come to the board for review. And there are some guidelines that are somewhat helpful there. And then the other thing, I'm glad you brought that up, Paul, because when we had the solar panel request a couple of years ago, I had to, we don't have specific guidelines for it adopted. And so what we did in that case was we go to the National Park Service, Secretary of Interior, and look for any guidance from them. And they have preservation briefs about a variety of topics that are available on their website. And so I was able to pull some guidelines and recommendations from them that was really helpful, I think, for the board and for me, at least, in reviewing that to figure out what was appropriate and what wasn't. We also have a Hrb policy about solar panels. So, and that says that if solar panels are on a rear facade, not a primary roof, and if they are flat and they're at the same angle as the roof and they're the same color as the roof, then they can be installed without HRB review. So that's a good example, Paul, to talk about the guidelines and how they're helpful and how they're not so helpful sometimes.
I'm going to step away for a second. Thank you. Excuse me.
So that's all I had. Any questions? Clear as mud. And
Well,
you know,
if
go ahead.
No, I was going to say if there's a guideline for mud, yeah, it's pretty clear. But no, I'm good. Thanks, Kelly.
One comment I was going to throw out there is just procedurally. We usually ask before any of the public hearings if the board members have visited the site. So I don't know if before next meeting we'll have any applications or not, but if we do, it's helpful if you can do a drive-by or something just to, you know, get a sense of the location or the structure if it's an existing structure.
Yeah, and I usually provide photos of the site and street view shots, but there's nothing like actually seeing it in person. Yeah. Well, thanks for sitting through that.
All right. I lost my agenda. Hold on for a moment. Can move on to the next item then, which is approval of minutes for, I believe it's April of 2020. I think I was the only one who was at that meeting.
And we had this question before, and so I know the answer. If you were not at the meeting as an HRB member, you can still vote to approve the minutes. There's no problem there.
So I didn't have any comments after reviewing, so I would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make
Yeah,
a motion. Go, Carrie.
I'll make the motion.
And I'll
To
second.
approve the minutes.
Okay. And I'll call the roll for a vote.
Can
Let's see.
I just ask, I read them. What are we approving of them?
We're just so they're in draft form, and once they are approved, just that yes, those are correct. Really, is the question you're answering?
Oh.
Like, yes, those minutes reflect what happened at the meeting, and then they can become final and be kind of filed away in our permanent record.
And so are all meeting minutes approved by the board? Okay.
Yeah. So we kind of have we're a little behind, right? We're at April 2020.
Okay.
So next meeting, hopefully you'll see May and June of 2020,
Okay.
and we'll try to catch up so that you're approving like more recent minutes at some point in the future. We'll probably get there. Yeah, so I think once they are approved by the board in this manner, then they can be posted on the city website and be the final record. The city also films these meetings, and the videos are available. So that record is available like right away for the public to review if they missed the meeting. The minutes are, delayed.
Okay, I just wasn't quite sure what was going on.
Can I make a point? Some of these old minutes are kind of like we're approving something that we were not part of. And it's kind of, there's a degree of awkwardness about them. And it's, we read them like anybody else could read them, but it's still a little awkward when we were not there at the meeting to say that all of the content is exactly right.
And while you were away for a second, we addressed that while it's awkward, it's still okay for you to vote on it, even if you weren't
Okay.
there.
Okay,
Although I think you can abstain. We only need a majority, as long as we have the quorum that was present, as long as we have a majority of votes that approve, it's okay.
Okay, I'll call the names. Ray Stovey,
Aye.
Paul Edgar,
yep, aye.
Sabrina Ferry,
Aye.
Carrie Crook,
Aye.
and Grant Blythe.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, so that concludes all of the business for the evening. We can move on to communications. Thank you.
I sent in a deal to Kelly about, I'm on the Clackamas County Historic Review Board, and we were asked to approve historic buildings or changes to even to the topology where in a National Register area or National Historic Landmark. And in that process, all of a sudden you find out that it's in effect a requirement of the federal, whenever you're doing things within an area that's adjoining waters of the state, waters of the United States. And so all of a sudden I started wondering, like in Kanema, where we have waters that flow through or from Kanema and flow into like Coffee Creek, and that flows into the Willamette River, they technically are what U.S. waters of the state. And so if Clackamas County says that this is a requirement and it goes all the way up, why wouldn't it be a requirement in Oregon City that we equally have to be in compliance and with this type of rule? And that's that was the reason why I sent a note to Kelly about it. I took some of the wording that was out of a document that was in front of me, and I just changed it to some local designation, effectively using words like if water coming out of the designated Kanema wetlands, if that is U.S. waters of the state, should it not require the same type of oversight that Clackamas County said is required? And so it was just a question that came up, and I've asked for a point of clarification on it.
Paul, I can respond to your email. I don't know that it's pertinent to the Historic Review Board.
You don't think it is?
It's more of a Department of State Lands regulatory
Requirement?
Like water resource protection issue.
Yeah. So yeah, whenever we're dealing with waters of the state, we're also trying to protect waters like that. I can remember when we bought Grandma's house, the house that I have, the lady across the street had her gray water from her washing machine going into the creek. And it was one of those awkward things because she was such a close friend of Grandma, but it was wrong right from the word go. And it violates all of the codes and some of the things that exist. And I just, to me, I have this environmental side of myself, and I see this document that says it's a requirement, and it requires historic preservation, or the State Department of Historic Preservation, and to rule on it and give it a green light. And I thought, if in our case we don't use SHPO, we do it ourselves. And so if that was the case, I was trying to identify that correlation.
I can I'm happy to ask SHPO about that and get back to you over email.
I would like that.
Very good. Any other communications? Kelly, did you have anything?
I do, yeah. I have a few things. Hopefully I'll make it quick. So we are in the middle of our compatible change project to look at the code as it relates to additions to non-contributing or non-designated structures in McLaughlin, as well as public improvements. And when HRB, what the threshold is for that projects like that coming to the board or having to meet historic design guidelines. We have an open house planned for February 10th at 7 p.m. So we have a set of alternatives that we have developed based on conversations with stakeholders and a review of how other jurisdictions address this. So we have some options and we've kind of evaluated those options against what our city goals are. And so we're going to be sharing that evaluation at the open house to see, what people think, get some input and some good dialogue going about, how, as we're, looking at the different options, and some of them are better in some ways than others, gauging, where people are and what is supported by the community. Once we have some input, then we would be coming to you with a recommendation at some point in the spring. So that open house is going to be virtual and it will be live, but also available for the rest of the month after online. So if somebody can't make it live, then there'll be a way for you to still participate just anytime virtually until the end of February. Next thing is we have three of you, Sabrina, Carrie, and Paul are being sworn in on Wednesday, February 3rd. That is next week. It's going fast. So just make sure you can log in, Zoom in to the city commission meeting to take your oath of office on that evening. And if I have any more detailed instructions for you, I will send them. The other thing that's happening at that meeting on the 3rd is the city commission wants the HRB to kind of give them their brief report from 2020 of HRB accomplishments from 2020. And so we actually need someone to volunteer to do that. And I have put together the list of everything that you all did, how many applications you reviewed and all that kind of good stuff. So I can give you that. And then it's really just like a 2-minute, here's what we did, hooray for us kind of thing.
Can we unanimously nominate Grant?
I don't think you need to vote on something like this, but.
I was going to volunteer Ray, but what day was that again?
That's Wednesday the 3rd.
The 3rd. Okay. Oh yeah, I can. I mean, I could probably do that if.
Your chair, it's appropriate.
All right. Sure.
So Grant, I'll send you the list. I'll just send it to all of you so you can see it. I mean, it actually looks really good. We did a lot in 2020, despite the pandemic. So thanks, Grant. And then last is the new members. We will get you city email addresses. So you'll have, at orcity.org email addresses, and we'll try to keep all HRB business just with that email address. If there are public records requests ever for emails, then we want to kind of protect your personal email address. So that's why we're doing that. And so hopefully Katie Riggs will figure out how to logistically get you set up with a username and password and all that good stuff. And then I will stop sending emails to your personal email. So you'll have to remember to like have it forwarded or whatever you want to do. And that's all I have.
I've got one thing, just a quick follow-up, Kelly. Did the Hive Social ever respond to
About the
letter?
signs.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm working with the owner on, you mean like the marquee sign?
Yeah, or the one to the left of that marquee sign?
Oh, right, because that one, yeah, that one didn't get reviewed either. So I don't know what her decision is going to be on how she wants to pursue that. I think she understands what is needed. And I think that'll probably be coming to you soon.
Okay.
I mean, one option is right to just remove it. So I don't know what the plan is going to be.
Okay.
Anything else? Anybody? No? Then we will adjourn the meeting at 8:10 p.m.
Thank you.
Thank you.